We are live on Zoom. We are live on Facebook. My name is Reed Mahalko from readaboutsex.com, founder of Sex Geek Summer Camp, and welcome to the second installment of a call that we started back in June as I add Marla Renee Stewart, who's with us. We did a call back in June about running and organizing live events in a vaccinated world, and I am so grateful that all of our discussion panelists from that talk that seems like years ago now, now that the summer is over, we are here for our How Did Our In-Person Events Go This Summer? A follow-up discussion about what worked, what didn't, and what we do differently. And I'm just so thrilled that I have these amazing event organizers and sex positive educators in my life. And we are joined tonight with Marla Renee Stewart, co-founder of Sex Down South, the Sex Down South Conference out of Atlanta. We have Angel Adeyoha, executive director of Folsom Street Fair, with us tonight. Misha, Bonaventura, and William Winters III, co-founders of the Bonobo Network, and Romy Ilan, founder of the Soul Play Festival. And this spans events that happened this summer with, I don't know the smallest group we had, but I was at an event with at least 150 people. And then I was also at an event with over 7,000 people. And I'm really excited to find out and have just a casual discussion about what worked and what didn't. I'm mostly going to get out of the way and invite whoever would like to go first. If you could please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do, because I know we have new people joining this call who weren't with us in June. And for those of you who are on Facebook, and also those of you who are with the Zoom call with us now, feel free to drop into the chats and into the comments. Where are you zooming in from? You can promote yourself, drop your links, because we're curious folk here. But more importantly, ask your questions in the comments. And then later, after we share a little bit, we might have time to actually unmute folks and take some live questions here. That being said, who wants to introduce themselves first from our illustrious group of panelists? Going once.
I'll go first.
Yay! Thank you, Marla.
My child is quiet for a moment. Let me hurry up. Hello, everybody. I'm Marla Renee Stewart. I am the owner of Velvet Lips. I'm a sexologist and sexual strategist there, as well as the co-founder of the Sex Down South Conference in Atlanta. We are in our 8th year. Will be next year. And what else did you want us to say, Reed?
Mostly just a little bit of an introduction, and then we'll kind of go around and check in about your events, but maybe how big the event was this year, and then you can tease us, because now we'll want to know how it went later.
Okay. So the event this year, it was 400 people had signed up, but about 250 actually showed up. And then we had about a little bit more around 250 who signed up for the hybrid portion, the online portion. So in total, just a little over 500.
I'm Romy Ilan. I founded and run Soul Play festivals for the past 6 or 7 years. It's a series of events, even though this year we only did one Soul Play festival, but it's a series of events that we run, of experiences that are really focused around human connection. One of the things that makes us special is that we are a 100% sober event, and we invite people to experience connection, in their full sober present self. This year, I would say the thing that we did best this year is run the event. Hands down, that worked. Running events this year was a very good idea, and I'm happy to talk a little bit more about what we did and what worked and maybe what didn't, but we did have about 450 people come for a full 4-day camp out, all-inclusive weekend. Yeah.
Thank you, Romy. Romy, why don't you pick who goes next?
I'm gonna pick Angel.
As you could see me fucking with my lighting. Hi. Hey everyone, I'm Angel. Personal bio, I'm a mixed indigenous, I'm Misha Cherokee from Kuala Boundary, North Carolina, living in Oakland, California, on unceded Ohlone land. Also, the organization that I run is in San Francisco, right across the bay, also on Ohlone land. I'm Two-Spirit, I'm a leather dyke, I'm an activist. I thought that I was done with my nonprofit days, but got roped into the great and fun job of executive director for Folsom Street 2 weeks before the pandemic. And so ran a very frantic, large digital event in 2020. And I cannot agree with Romy more. I'm very glad to be back to in-person events, while also frantic, totally different and way more in my wheelhouse. We had we always have a smaller event in July. It's usually called Up Your Alley. This year we did a modified event called Folsom Street Market, which was really focused on vendors, didn't have a lot of entertainment. That was about 5,000-ish people. And then in September, when the Folsom Street Fair is usually pre-pandemic about 250,000 people. This year was about 75,000. We renamed it Mega Hood 2021 because the very first Folsom Street Fair in 1984 was called Mega Hood. And also, to be honest, we wanted to confuse people a little and cut our numbers. People were a little mad about it, but there was a method to the madness. Even so, we overshot our projections, and there was a moment where it was a little scary, but all in all, went very well. The community was really happy to have that space again. And we were able to put a lot of local and community talent on our stages, and that was pretty cool. So psyched to talk more about it. Thanks for having us.
Oh, thanks for being had. Who would you like to pick to go next?
Right, the popcorn. I will pick William.
Everybody, my name is William Winters. I'm the founder and co-producer, co-director of Bonobo Network. We're a sex-positive community based in Oakland, California, but with members in all over the world and in-person and virtual events. We have done so many good things. We threw a total of, I personally threw a total of like 7 large play parties of 100 plus people between May 29th and July 30th. We've since done a monthly party with Bonobo, not to mention our annual retreat of 200 attendees just a month ago. And we had like 2 people report COVID cases after test positive for COVID after one of our parties immediately after the Delta wave, and we immediately implemented a testing protocol for our events. So now, in order to come to one of our events, you have to either take an antigen test on site or show up with a PCR test administered within 48 hours of the beginning of the event. And that is kept, along with just, being in the very, very good Bay Area, has been very helpful in keeping COVID from our doorstep. And Misha Bonaventura, the one and only.
I'm Misha. I did all those things with William. It was, yeah, I look forward to talking more about it, but I don't feel like I need to say all of that again.
Thanks, Misha. So what I think I'd like to do next is kind of get into the bones of it. If you could quickly just kind of run down with what your protocols were. And then I think it would probably make more sense what your protocols were, what worked, what didn't work, and then also just kind of give us a little rundown of what you might be doing differently for next year. And I also want to invite our panelists to just like, I would like this to just be kind of a dialogue and a conversation. So if you have something to add in or, toss back and forth, let's do that. But like, rather than kind of recreate the first call that we did in June, what did you do? How did it go? What didn't go so well? And what are you thinking about doing differently as we move into 2022? I also just want to say again, thank you so much for our panelists for all that you did this summer. I was going to say chicken shit to run the live event, but Sex Geek Summer Camp was so early in the summer, and like as I was getting really close to announcing it, the Delta variant hit. So you're all some of the best thinkers I think are out there and having nerdy conversations about protocols. So a lot of my access to you is informing how I'm going to be doing things in 2022. So I just want to say thank you for all the influence and all the hard work you're doing behind the scenes to make your events safer, so that hopefully a lot of us who are watching can make our events safer next year. Who'd like to share first?
I kind of feel like we could, because I think that we might be the first, had created the first events starting in May 29th of this little group, and maybe that makes sense. So in March, I think, is when we started hearing that the vaccine was coming out and that it was going to be possible for us to start throwing events. And William, I just have to give kudos to William, because he has been so on top of the COVID research and what we can and can't do, and really grounded in the communication to our community about how we're going to handle safety. And I think that actually was probably one of the biggest successes that Bonobo Network had around the pandemic, was just being incredibly informed, being incredibly grounded in science and the risk factors, and being able to then say, like, this is what we are choosing to do, and these are our boundaries, and this is what we're doing to go forward. And so we decided that we would throw double the parties that we normally throw starting in May, every other week for the next 6 weeks, so that we could actually accommodate our participants, because we knew that there would be a lot of people that wanted to attend our parties, and a lot of people that wanted to actually be just be together again. And so we decided that we would require vaccinations, and that was probably the biggest decision. And I don't know if it was the most controversial, but it definitely brought up people's hackles at the beginning. But we just kind of made that decision and then carried forward. William, do you want to chime in with anything?
Hey, everybody. Yeah, a few things. So first off, we didn't take the decision to start throwing parties and creating in-person events again lightly, both from the perspective of public health and also from the perspective of our community's just sort of emotional readiness for these events. And so we wanted to do a fair amount of warm up, and also of the community, and also grounding in the sort of best public health practices as we understood them at the time. And so there were a few things that we did. So the first was that we started in April creating a Bonobo Network picnic event that we would do at public parks around the Bay Area. And that was the first time we'd done any kind of in-person event since the before times. And people were definitely ready for it because we had like 250 attendees of the very first picnic. It was this amazing atmosphere, and it was wonderful. And we also encouraged people to wear masks, to hang out in their pods, to socially distance, to communicate a lot about their own vaccination status and so on and so forth. If they were going to and to ask for affirmative consent before being unmasked within 6 feet of anyone who wasn't in their pods. And so, we just like really wanted to ease people back into a social environment, and it turned out to be a very large social environment. And we did another picnic in May before the first party, and that went super well. So the other thing that we did was we were in really regular conversation with doctors and public health physicians who could advise us on what to do, how to like come back in a safer way, what kind of protocols we needed. After a conversation with a few folks, we figured a couple of things. One, doing events that were in mostly outdoor spaces was the very safest thing we could do. And so we opted to throw in-person outdoor parties for 5 of those or 4 of those first 7 events that we created. And we opted to use the outdoor venues that we had available. And I just want to say thank you so much to the folks who stepped up to allow to host our events so frequently during this period. And I want to recognize that not everyone has access to that resource of being able to have, sort of sexual or sex positive events outdoors. It takes a lot of care of the venue and also the neighborhoods in which the venues exist to, like really make that happen. And so thank you. Yeah, I mean, so yeah, we also had a vaccination requirement for our events. Everyone had to submit proof of vaccination who wanted to attend our events, had to submit proof of vaccination before we would even sell them a ticket. And that was how we proceeded until the Delta variant hit. And that kind of threw everything into a big confusing tailspin. And the way that we dealt with that, and I'm going to try to wrap up very quickly here. The way that we dealt with that, again, after talking with the medical folks in our corner, was to introduce a testing requirement. And we settled on using home antigen tests as the primary testing method. And we had volunteers most often who had like medical backgrounds, nurses, and so on, actually administering the tests upon check-in. And in the last month or 2, we have allowed PCR tests within 48 hours, administered within 48 hours of an event start time, or a PCR test. And you can see our entire COVID policy at bonobonetwork.com/COVID.
Who'd like to share next?
Thanks, William. Thanks, Misha. Order.
Oh yeah, let's do that. That's great. Who had the next event?
We started
Marla
our small street person.
Marla and me were at the same time.
When were you?
Yeah, we were me and Marla are the exact same weekend in September.
So are you guys going to Rochambeau to see who gets to share first?
I think we should.
I want to see some fighting, maybe some, just to box it out. So then I guess
Zoom wrestling.
I know, Zoom wrestling. I think we were next then. So we did something that I found super, super, super helpful is, and I think William and Misha are speaking to this as well, as we did smaller events first, and that is not what we generally do. We very much have two like flagship events, and then we do some pretty large parties around those, usually like 600 people or so. So we did little street fairs, and our first one in May was only 4 booths and a little speaker, and we just like, we were like, okay, everyone, come out of your little holes and let's say hello again. And then our second one was in June. People were starting to think like, oh, Pride might happen. It didn't, for the record, in San Francisco. There was an impromptu march, but there was no official SF Pride event in June, which made us officially the largest event in Northern California this year. And I hope it's the only year that that's true. I would very much like to never have that great title again. But our smaller events were, for me, it was so crucial for shaking off the rest. Like I was very out of practice. I was also very out of like the one of the things event producers I think have to do is be prepared for any eventuality. And I was hadn't flexed those muscles in a minute. So it was very good to have a smaller event. In June, we had 15 different vendors and public health folks. Like, we had some people doing STI testing on site. We had some folks doing some political tabling, but mostly it was like kink and leather vendors. And we had someone giving pony rides. It was cute, but it was, again, a couple hundred people. It was also kind of to support some of the local businesses. We partnered with a bar each time. The first 3 times we partnered with the Powerhouse in San Francisco, and then the next 3 times we partnered with the Eagle. And it gave us an opportunity to both reestablish some of our, our working relationships that had not been even approached in a minute. Which I felt like was also crucial to pulling off something larger. And it gave us all a chance to get in some practice. And the other thing that it was kind of a testing ground for how to do a large scale event outside, because a lot of the COVID restrictions were limited to indoor events. So a lot of the time when we were talking to the Department of Public Health, they didn't have a lot of good guidance for us. They were like, well, there's nothing else like this, so we don't know what to tell you. So a lot of the thing, what we were doing was developing our medical plans and our safety plans with people in community who are nurses and doctors and that sort of thing, and then just bringing it to the city and being like, well, how about this? Interestingly, Folsom street events have always been, since 1984, we have always had alcohol sales. We did not this year. I never want to go back to having them. Can for sure say more about that. And I don't say that as someone who is like, I'm not sober, I like to drink. But I really, the safety profile on a couple 100,000 people, many of whom are really hammered, it's intense without COVID. So the shift that it brought us was like a lot less cleanup, many fewer lost and found items, and a lower medical response rate, which was really good to see. Our first larger event, the 5,000 person event in July, we did not require vax cards. That was right when Delta had just hit the city and we didn't really kind of know the implications of it yet. Out of our weekend, there was at least community-wide a noticeable surge. San Francisco Department of Public Health was not able to detect it as noticeable, but our community is a lot smaller than that. So the other thing is that our events tend to have a lot of parties around it. So there are a lot of parties that are indoors, and there are a lot of parties that are very up close and personal. So because of that, it was kind of hard to track what was from our events, what was from surrounding events. But it was enough that we ended up having a public town hall and making a survey for folks to fill out to say, like, what would make you more comfortable COVID-wise coming to a large outdoor event in September? We got a really good amount of responses to that. I feel like a lot of times we put surveys out and we're just like, hello, crickets. Nobody says anything. And you're just like, oh, 6 people, yay, thanks. So in this case, 300 people responded. We had a town hall where handful, I'd say like 40 people showed up to ask questions, to give advice, to talk about like what would be, what would make them feel safer. And then from that, we built our implementation plan. We also have, I'll drop it in the chat as well. We also have a COVID safety page on our website that talks about like the implementation that we did for our events this year. And I would say the main implementations were we didn't sell alcohol. We limited the amount of booths and we put them in a stagger pattern instead of putting them side by side so that you could approach on all 3 sides. And some booths had it where you could approach on even 4 sides. So what it did was instead of pushing traffic in one chunky direction where I don't know how many of y'all been to Folsom Street Fair, but oftentimes you literally cannot move in some of the thickest spots. That didn't happen at all this year. I moved through the entire crowd all day long. And then we didn't get any of those really dense spots, which was great. There was always space for people to sort of step aside in a way that there hasn't ever been at Folsom Street Fair in the past. We took 3 blocks off of our initial permitted footprint so that we would have a little less to manage. We put triple the amount of hand sanitizing stations that we would usually put, and instead of only putting them near the porta potties, we put them in the walkways alongside the sunscreen stations. So you could, if you were walking, you're gonna like even coming in the gate, everywhere you would collide with a hand sanitizing station to encourage folks to use those. We cordoned off our food area instead of having it be sort of open within the fair. We had it blocked where there was another vaccine check at the food area, because the vaccine check at our gates, while it catches a lot of the folks who come through, we're on a public city street, so people live within our fair footprint. So somebody could just come out of their building and be at our event. And because of that, we don't have that same kind of control. So we were a little more controlled in the food area. We made sure that in the food area, we had distance spaces marked out for people to sit down. We encouraged masking in really crowded spots. So most of the space, people could easily be pretty distant from each other. And so we didn't worry about in those spaces, but like on the dance floor or where people were really up on each other, we would have safety volunteers go through and say like, hey, can you put your mask up? We weren't absolute sticklers about it because there isn't a city mandate, but we wanted to at least like remind people, and people were pretty compliant. So the report back afterwards is that there was not a noticeable surge of cases. And, after a 75,000 person event where we had infrastructure for 50, what would we do differently? Get infrastructure for more people. One of the things that definitely felt a little sketchy at the end was like the last 90 minutes, we were clearly over capacity. Not as far as people being close together, but as far as us having enough safety volunteers to keep an eye on everything. Our medical got a little, they had to call in some backup. Like we definitely tipped over a tiny bit, but in the end, everybody was okay and safe. There was not, no injuries and no surge in COVID cases. So I have said repeatedly, no one died, no one was grievously injured, and no one at the city hates me. So pretty successful. And I think our saving grace, and I know like this is different for different events, but is being outdoors. It's just, people feel a lot safer for scientifically grounded reasons, hanging out outdoors. But we also opened a community center this year. So we have hosted a lot of indoor events, and we are starting to host more indoor events. So we're figuring out what is our community protocol look like around that. We're hosting everything from little recovery meetings to big crazy drag shows. We had one of those last Friday. And it feels good, but also there's like definitely a lot of caution, a lot of checking and rechecking, a lot of like discussing with producers what's the best practices. So we're still in that let's figure it out together mode for sure.
My favorite part of Folsom was that the furries were the safest people or safest beings in the
they made it onto the news because the news guy was like, your masks are very cool.
And so, Angel, I just want to make sure how many people, what was the capacity that or the attendance you had?
75-ish thousand.
1,000?
1,000, yes.
Not 7,500.
No, not 7,500, 75,000. We had infrastructure for 50,000, which we usually have infrastructure for 200,000, give or take. So we scaled back pretty hard. And one of the big like ouch lessons this year was that everything was so much more expensive. All the labor is more expensive. All of the bathrooms are more expensive. All of our cleanup crew are like, they call it greening. There used to be 3 choices, so they were a little competitive. One went out of business. One doesn't take anything below like the size of outside lands anymore. So we were left with one choice, and she could basically name her price, and she did. And it was more than twice what we paid in 2019. So, right, like even food prices were up for feeding our volunteers at hospitality. So everything was more expensive to run for sure. And in some ways, it's like we're also getting to paying people a more just wage. So I'm into it on that level, as long as we can break even.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Romy, Marla, Renee Stewart. Who's next?
Hello. Okay. Are you going to go?
No, I was unmuting in order to say I would be honored for you to go first.
Okay. So we were very different in the way that we ran Sex Down South this year. It was a very hard decision to make testing not required. And I think part of that was because, we had team members whose family members have died from COVID vaccine complications. We had just lots of different stories, of people, who are immunocompromised, who just all the issues. And I think because we strive to be as inclusive as possible, we just made the decision to say, hey, vaccinations are not required. However, we strongly encourage you to get vaccinated. We have put the bracelet protocol in there because I know we talked about that last time. So we had bracelets for if you're vaccinated. So you need to show your card to get that bracelet. And then we strongly encourage to also have a negative COVID test. And you would have to show your paper in order to get, that's a different color bracelet. And then we had masks were mandatory. And we had and masks were mandatory at the hotel too, so that was kind of easy. And then hand sanitizer was in every swag bag, so everybody had hand sanitizer all the time, everywhere. And so yeah, that was as far as the in-person, that was and it actually worked out. We did not have anybody who reported back as testing positive for COVID, which is fantastic. So, that was great. But again, we were expecting, so in 2020, we were expecting about 650 people, and to go down, I think was, that was really hard. But at the same time, we were kind of happy about it because we knew that a lot of people weren't going to come out, you know. And then we knew some people were sick of being in the house as well. So it was you know, we put the protocols up on the website. We made everybody, you know, sign waivers. We had I think that's, yeah, and we had the hybrid portion for people who didn't want to show up. So that was an adjustment as well. So what we did worked, you know, and I would say the only thing, you know, sometimes we would have to remind people about keeping up their mask. And people were pretty good. Our volunteers were, you know, people were pretty good at doing that. So, you know, checking each other on it. So that was, that was great. I was supposed to have a PA at this time, y'all. So now I just have a baby who is just being a baby. So the hybrid portion, the only thing that I would say to do that is that it was basically running two conferences at the same time. And that was way too difficult, and our team has to be bigger. So that was, and everybody hated the platform in our feedback, which is a platform we used before. And so I thought that was funny. I think because now everybody is just a pro now on the virtual thing. They're like, this platform sucks. So I think that that was just a downer, because we were like, okay, we know this platform well, and it didn't perform the way that we wanted it to perform, and we needed another probably 5 people on the team to make it work, instead of us trying to battle both. So yeah, is that a question for me in the chat? It says, were you rebroadcasting the live classes to the virtual platform, or were they separate agendas? They were separate agenda. Most of them were separate agendas, but we did have some crossover. So there was one class that actually had someone virtually and had someone in person. And so having that, and then also broadcasting the keynotes live, we needed a bigger budget, which we didn't have because we didn't have as many people sign up. And so even though we wanted to do COVID testing on site, and that was our whole entire budget, and we were like, we can't do that. So that's why we just had to strongly encourage folks to get tested on their own. But it was 2 separate, basically, things, except for the people who came in person also got access to the virtual. So they had access to those recordings after the conference. So of course that ticket was a higher price ticket. Yeah, I think that's about it.
Yeah. Thank you, Marla. And also thank you for I guess field testing, trying to run 2 conferences at the same time, one virtual and one live. I'm taking lessons away from this.
Yeah, it was a hard one.
We've got a couple of questions that were happening in the chat, and I want to encourage everybody who's on the call, and also people who are watching on Facebook Live, please leave your questions, and we'll try to get to them tonight, and maybe people will answer them later if that happens over on Facebook. But we had one question about COVID testing at the door from Eco. And do they test right away? and wait for the test results? Did you need to hire a professional medical person to administer the tests at the parties? So like for any of you, like what worked, what didn't work about like actually trying to test people at the event, if you were doing that?
We
I'm
were
open
very
to
lucky. The Department of Public Health showed up and tested people. We just asked them. They were actually very into, in San Francisco, they're very into coming into community and doing tests and vaccines.
Cool.
Oh, that's wonderful. I wouldn't have even thought to just call the Department of Public Health. That's wonderful. Great. Romy?
Yeah, I think I'm happy to share a little bit what we did and how we did the testing at the door and all those things. So again, I represent Soul Play Festivals. We ran an event in September 9th to 12th, which was 4 days camp out. So like in person and there for the whole time, all inclusive with the meals and everything. I think for us, the goal, we had multiple, like 2 different goals, I would say, like large overarching goals. One was to minimize the impact that our event has on public health. And 2, I guess there might be 3 goals. 2 was to minimize the impact of the health of our community members. And 3 was to create an event that actually allows people to feel safe enough to open up and to connect in the way that our event wants them to, that invites them to. So we were really taking care of the emotional state of people at the event. And we looked at it by kind of looking at it in basically 3 stages. There was the, how do we keep COVID out of the event? How do we minimize COVID's entry into the event? 2 is how do we minimize the spread of COVID within the event if it did enter? And then 3 was how do we take care of the community at large in the event that COVID spread without us knowing during the event? And it's kind of all of our policies basically kind of fit into those 3 buckets. And so for minimizing entry into the event, we did have a vaccine requirement, plus we had a testing requirement. We chose to allow for people either to get a test on their own, and it could have been either a PCR, which was within 48 hours before the event, or a rapid test day of. And everyone had to do that test. If someone showed up without doing that, we did have kind of an amount of tests that we sold at the door. So that was kind of how we offset the cost. So you're talking about, we did not have a medical professional. We did do the home test that anybody can take for themselves. We did have people that knew how to explain how to do it really quickly. And we did charge for that so that it offset the cost of that. So if somebody showed up without that, we charged them at the door. Another thing that we did was we encouraged people to stay home if they felt ill in any way. And we said that we'd give a refund, no questions asked. So we basically we were just like, if you feel ill and or anything, just stay home. And that really helped kind of alleviate some people that might show up with just a minor flu symptoms or something if they're feeling okay. We really just wanted to keep that out as well. So that was kind of for the pre-event, kind of minimizing COVID into the event. For during the event, minimizing the spread, we made the event 100% outdoors. Typically our events are half and half, they're hybrids. We do have indoor spaces that we utilize for our events. We decided to make the whole thing outdoors, and even though that created kind of a logistical challenge, but we did that. We did put a wristband. We kind of enacted some kind of wristband situation, but we only opted in for one color wristband. And the wristband was basically to state that I am above average cautious in terms of COVID for whatever reason. I take care of the elderly, I live with immunocompromised people, I myself am just above average cautious. And that wristband basically meant, hey, please maintain social distance from me unless I invite you into my space. So it gave some people the ability to still feel safe, even though if they were above the average in the community and needing a little bit more space. We did mandatory hand washing. We encouraged, in meal lines, we encouraged mask wearing in the buffet lines while they were during the meals. We designated a specific separate isolated medical room for if anyone was feeling sick, that we actually had a place for them to go that they could, until we determined whether they needed to go home, whether they have COVID or anything, but we had kind of a space for that was separate. And we encourage people to report during the event if they're having any symptoms. So just so that we know immediately and can kind of take care of that. So that was kind of during the event, how we minimize the spread. For the post-event impact, and to make sure we're not sending people home and to loved ones and to other populations, this is the thing I think I'm most proud of that we did. We administered a random sample of tests on Sunday afternoon before we sent people home of 20% of the population in order to just see, has COVID been spreading here? That may be something that the original test didn't find. And we specifically designated that it would be people that are from different pods. We tried to kind of spread it across different pods. And one of the only rules for it was you had to kind of waive your right to privacy, to confidentiality. Like if you do test positive, we are going to tell people that happened. That was kind of just a commitment that you did in order, if you signed up for that. We ran 80 tests, they were all negative. And then we continued to encourage people though to hold off from meeting with vulnerable populations for several days after the event, just in case. Another 50 or 60 people on their own did PCR tests 3 days after the event and then reported on our social media. And we basically got a lot of indication that there was very little, that there was no COVID impact from the event. Which is awesome. I will say that there's a lot of like, that is definitely luck, a lot of luck involved as well. It could have not been that way. But I feel like we were like the fact that there was zero is luck. And though we were well positioned to react quickly and discover and react quickly if we hadn't been so fortunate. And so I really like, especially the thing that if I have one thing that I would say that I encourage other producers to do, producers of events that span multiple days, I would encourage this kind of exit test idea. I really think it's one of the things that most instilled confidence in people. And one of the things that I think is most worrying is that we end up, yeah, we're all consenting adults and we can decide for ourselves the risk that we take. But the thought that we are then endangering other populations afterwards is the thing that really sat heavier for me. And that's the one thing that I think was really helpful for everyone to feel a little bit more comfortable that we're not sending people home with COVID, or at least, we have a better knowledge. That's about it. I guess the last thing I just want to say is it was so special to witness after kind of a year and a half or 2 years of a lot of people being isolated at home, and a lot of people not having that level of community. Like for a lot of people, this was their first event. Each person in this room has experienced that. And it's so special to be able to provide a space that feels safe enough to kind of connect with people in a large amount. And I feel like it was so transformative. It was the best event we've ever run. It was the most impactful event we've ever run. And I just feel really privileged and honored to have been there and witnessed this.
I have a question for you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Like with your I don't know, you called it a sick space, but did people go in there? Were there people actually in there?
Were they in where? Say again.
Your sick space, the space where you designated for people if they felt sick?
Oh, yeah, yep. People didn't go in there. It was more of a place that we basically designated a spot that if anybody reported that they were sick, like ahead of time, like kind of like a medical area, but we wanted to make sure that we had a place that we wouldn't just send them back to say like, oh, go back to your tent or go back to your cabin. And in case there is something infectious going on, we wanted to make sure that we have an option to like immediately kind of isolate them in comfort. and kind of minimize the spread really quickly. So we could react really quickly to anything that comes up. That was the idea. We never used it. It ended up being empty the whole time. I thought you said sex space.
No, no, sorry. Sick, S-I-C-K.
Did anybody go in there in that sex space? And I was like, huh. Nobody told me about the sex space. But...
Is that why you paused? Because I was like, what's going on?
We've got some other questions just to try to make sure we cover them. um, uh, how did y'all deal with any, or did you get any pushback around requiring vaccine cards if you were doing vaccine mandatory, or people who aren't vaccinated but are careful and get tested regularly? For those people who wanted to join your events, like what was the pushback? And then also, an added question was, how did you work with or respond to folks who either had medical trauma, or were immunocompromised, and were in a situation where they wanted to come but couldn't be vaccinated per your requirements?
But so we started thinking about the vaccination question in Bonobo very, very early on. And even like from the early days of COVID, we set a really clear standard in the community that, we're talking about consensus science within the Bonobo, within Bonobo's social forums, and nothing else. No fringe, anything. And we encourage people to have a lot of like humility about what they're saying, because the science was like changing on a regular basis. But that, like, we're really talking about like consensus scientific opinion, we're listening to public health professionals, and that's how we're approaching it in our community. So that set a tone from March 2020, basically. When the Pfizer vaccine trials were first announced in, I guess, like October, maybe early November of 2020, there was a really strong basis. And we actually sent our first email about vaccines and what they meant for our ability to potentially gather again in 2021, like in November of last year. So we started talking about it even then, like, kidding pretty strongly at that time what our stance was going to be. Yeah, and so we we were just like really clear throughout. And so as a result, like a lot of people who were anti-vax or had like other ideas about the science and so on, like they just didn't really stick with Bonobo as we made the transition. There were like a small handful of folks who are anti-vaccine, who like want to remain part of the online community and so on, but they don't come to any of our events, not even the outdoor events, and because I think that it's like not a super like there is a clear consensus, and I actually think that's a very good thing. Like I think it's good that our community like has really well understood standards, and I think that people who want a different experience should go to the communities and spaces where people believe what they believe about these things. So that's basically how we handle it, just like extreme clarity. As for the question about like how we're dealing with people with medical trauma and so on, that's a little bit trickier. I mean, what I would say to that is that like there are there is one reason that is like currently approved by the CDC for like not receiving a vaccination, and that reason is that you're allergic to one or more of the ingredients or in the vaccine, or you have like a history of prophylaxis when a vaccine's been administered. And so that's just the standard that we have used, and we haven't really been particularly willing to make exceptions. And I've definitely talked to folks whose doctors have been like, oh, well, like let's wait until your inflammation markers have gone down a little bit before you get the vaccine and so on. But I've talked to just like, we've only gotten one person whose doctor sent a letter indicating that there is an allergy issue. And so we've had one unvaccinated person attend any of our events since May.
One of the things that helped with our conversation with the community about it was well, I think William really noted something, and you have to have agreement among your crew. Like our board was all on one page, that helped. But we immediately framed it as an issue of consent, which I believe it to be. And I think that was helpful when we got, some inevitable pushback, but also San Francisco is, our numbers are really good here. We're, we had the less pushback than I thought we would have. A handful of folks reached out via email or Instagram to either ask for some sort of an exception or to yell at me, either of which is fine, whatever you have time in your day to do. But those I just was entertained by. But the folks who wanted an exception, we did talk to folks who, for whatever reason, like one of our vendors, for instance, like she lives up in the mountains. She hadn't been around many people. So she was kind of late to the vaccine. So she had one dose. And so we were like, okay, you have to get a test, bring your results, and you have to stay masked the whole time. Vendors had to stay masked the whole time anyway, but we kind of emphasized it for her. And she was happy to do that because she wanted to come. We did have a couple cases where folks like forgot their card or didn't have the picture or whatever. So it was nice that we had Department of Public Health on site to test people if we needed to. But we were the clarity really helps. I think that's one of the things to nail down is like, where does your event stand and what, and once you're clear on that, like just there's no, that is not a negotiable piece of this. So I think like being firm, remembering to be kind, even if you are, exhausted and in the middle of planning and all of the things, and not like be a dick just because somebody is doing anything you don't agree with, but also to be clear and to be firm and to say like, this is our policy. And the other thing that helped us out is that San Francisco, right before our large event, instituted you had to have a Vax card to go into any bars, and everybody wants to go to the bars. So you were already like, you're not getting to go to the bar, come on. So everybody was already ready with the like, I have it on my Apple Wallet, and I also have it set that if I walk into the Eagle, it comes up automatically because sometimes I like to party. But yeah, it's my favorite bar. So you can set your favorite bar as like your home bar on this one app, and it'll like pop up your Vax card for you. So yeah, that was the other thing, was like people weren't able to go to restaurants or bars if they weren't vaccinated. So that really helped on our end because people were already kind of prepped and ready for it. And we got very little pushback at the gates. By the time people were already at our gates, I'll try and find the app and drop it in here. By the time people got to our gates, they were kind of already knew what was going on. We had big signs at each gate that said, vaxxed and masked. Obviously the Vax had XXX on it. We made some stand-up cutout Dr. Fauci's in harnesses with a belt buckle that said vaxxed with 3 X's, gotta give Fauci some bling, let people take selfies with him. That was cool. So basically we didn't, we tried to make it fun and funny and cute as we like to do, but we were also pretty clear on what our policy was, and that, I think that helped with folks. Yeah, the My Vaccine Record.ca.gov, if you have that, you're able to put it in your Apple Wallet. You can put it in a couple of different apps. And the other thing was we had to do a little research on like what other countries were offering, because some people at that point were coming in from other countries. We were just starting to get, because we had just opened up some of that we didn't get a lot of out of country folks, but we did have a few. And so we had to be able to like figure out what did their vax cards look like.
I want to add like so besides like my vaccine record, just like I just cannot underestimate the extent to which having good public health infrastructure has enabled our ability to return in ways that we felt good about. Like we have like multiple testing sites in the Bay Area that are free that will return test results within 24 hours, most often within 12 hours, like PCR tests. We have this amazing site that allows anyone to get their vaccine record, like a link to their vaccine record, texted to them at any moment if you don't save it on your phone. We have an amazing notification system in California. So Romy noted that his policy asked for folks to get tested after the event. The Bonobo policy also suggests that people get tested within 3 to 5 days after any of our events. And we also ask that everyone actually activate their notification settings, which are just in our phones. like Apple has partnered, and Apple has partnered, or you can also get an app in the Google Play Store that enables notifications if your Bluetooth has been within, within 6 feet for prolonged periods of time, the Bluetooth of someone else who tests positive for COVID, you get a notification saying that an exposure notification saying that you may have been exposed to COVID-19, please go get tested and isolate yourself. That like these tools are huge. And so, it's just, I just want to say that like, we're very, very fortunate, those of us in California, that we are in a state that has invested so well and so wisely in these resources. And again, that's not something that we take for granted or something that we assume that everyone in every state has access to.
Thank you. Great question here. Any of you considering requiring booster shots to qualify attendees as fully vaccinated for future events? I mean, maybe this is a shift towards like any thoughts or changes or upgrades for live events coming in 2022?
We are not, I mean, frankly, so right now, boosters just aren't available to everyone. I mean, without like having to lie to your doctor or, whatever. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that like, that's one reason that we're not immediately planning on making boosters a requirement. I think that, the other reason is that like it's exciting that we have this tool in our toolbox, and I think that like there is still a lot of conversation, a very important conversation happening in the public health world about the need for boosters in highly vaccinated. They're available to all of us in California as of this week. Amazing. Wow, I have been on vacation. Thank you, Michael. Cool. All right. So let's put reason number one aside. Reason number two is that I think there's like some really important conversations happening among public health officials about like whether boosters are like needed. And I would like to talk with more folks who work in that world to see whether we should implement that policy, and if so, by when.
And I think one of the things that keeps coming up for me around all of this, like, what are we doing? What's the policy? Is the idea of eliminating risk has never been part of what we talk about. And I think that COVID put us all into a hyper aware state around risk, which is, I think people are starting to sort of negotiate what does it mean to be in a more like healthy, realistic relationship with our risk assessments, because the idea of reducing our risk to zero is, well, first of all, it's just a false, it's like that's not available. So the world that I came out into as a queer and a pervert was very risky. And we were always negotiating risk amongst ourselves and each other. And also, like, I live in the Bay Area, which has all of the like asshole driving of LA, but none of the skill, right? So I drive by like 6 traffic accidents on my way to work every day. Like, we are at risk. And the idea that we can eliminate this one specific risk has gotten really almost neurotic for a lot of us, because none of us have ever lived through a global pandemic before. So I think like I think we're starting to talk about risk mitigation and harm reduction, at least the circles that I'm in are, when we're talking about, I don't know, exchanging fluids. I feel like I'm back in the 90s, y'all. The idea that, like, right, this is reaching a certain point of how do we find out what our acceptable risk profile is and then communicate that to others. I think that luckily a lot of us have good grounding in that, thanks to some people who have been talking about how to talk about STI status for ever and ever. Saw your post, Reed. This idea that these conversations should be part of what we are talking about when we're talking about sharing sexual space, when we're talking about sharing intimate space. And also, everyone I know who works in the medical field is well, they're past where we're at because they're overexposed, but everyone who I know who works in the medical field is like, yeah, I think we're at an acceptable risk level as long as you're double vaxxed. It's like, do the thing, you're not going to get sick, you're not going to go to the hospital, you're not going to die. And that has given me a lot of breathing room and a lot of different feelings about large events. I went, okay, you can all laugh, you ready? I went to EDC. That is called Electric Daisy Carnival. It is a giant 4-day rave in the desert. My daughter was turning 30. It was the only thing she wanted for her birthday. I did ask if I could buy her something expensive instead, and she said no. So I went to this giant rave. I'm too old and too tired, but I did it. And it was full of humans, full of fucking humans. It was outdoors only, which did help. And it was vaxxed only, which also helped. But I walked in and out of very crowded areas when people were like people had masks on in the mosh pit, y'all. It was so cool. Like, people were very thoughtful and aware. And the other thing that I saw that there was more of, I think as a result of our awareness around this, there was way more disability access. And so I have never seen such good ADA access at an event before. And it really inspired me to do better at our events. Like, I have a spinal injury, and the last day, my back just said, no more for you. And I just I couldn't take another step. And people just took awesome care of me and were super sweet and had a plan. And I was like, oh, I love that y'all already had a plan. And to bring that back to Romy about your group having a space, we have a plan, and hopefully we don't execute the plan, but we have a way to take care of each other. And I think that we're hopefully taking a lot of this knowledge that I think it took a lot of people out of a bit of like just autopilot and into like, okay, we do have to examine how we impact each other. What is the possible harm? What is the possible danger? But also, the possible harm and the possible danger shouldn't stop us cold. And certainly not at this point when we have made some pretty big advances. So most of the folks that I know who are in community, who aren't heavily immune compromised, although most of my friends who are HIV positive have already gotten their boosters and are cleared to, do pretty normal stuff at this point. but who don't have a reason to be extremely high risk are easing back into, you know, sharing intimate space with other people, whether that is having a meal without masks on or whether it is going to a sex party. So I think we're all going to have to figure out those risks together.
Thanks, Angel. As we bring this in for a landing, like any final thoughts for folks with questions, drop them in the chat because I think this just works easier to read them off. But like any final thoughts or ideas for anyone who's thinking about running live events in the new year?
Well, I thought I wanted to answer that question around the refund policy.
Oh, great. Yeah.
Like, you know, for us, we've always had a no refund policy. So, but we do have a transferring policy. So you can transfer the name or, you know, transfer it to someone else, or you can transfer it to the following year. So that is our policy, that, and we just have stuck by that policy. So, and that included this year too, even when when the conference is 2 days in, people were like, can I transfer? And I was like, that's fine. You can transfer it to next year. So it was fine.
And I think the person asked about insurance. I was, not only was I not able to find insurance like that, our insurance carrier, who has been historically pretty great, was like, we will not cover anything if this cancels for COVID reasons. They were super clear. And we did have to hand out some refunds from like vendors who had prepaid in 2020. And occasionally it was a bit ouch. But yeah, we also had our events aren't ticketed. So if it was, we might have a different policy. I feel you on that, Marla, because how else are you going to pay the bills? But our vendors are one of the people who prepay our things, and we did have to give out a couple of big refunds. So
yeah, I'd like to add on that we actually also have a no refund policy. At least it's like I think 7 days before the event. We do have a progressive refund policy where we allow for 50% up to a certain point, and then but 7 days before the event, there is no refunds. And what was interesting was we took a bet that people would respect just the idea, kind of like a sliding scale, or like a no one turned away for lack of funds policy, where we basically asked people to be in integrity and actually use it if they actually need it. And there were other people that missed the event because circumstances changed and couldn't come and didn't ask for a refund. So it's not that people just used it. Everyone who now couldn't come were like, oh, I'm going to ride this now and just pretend that I'm sick. So I was actually inspired by people's integrity and didn't feel that it was abused, and that people really respected that and kind of took it when they needed it, and the people that didn't need it just didn't show up and kind of forfeited the ticket anyway. So just something to think about. I really think that I've found time and time again that when we trust our community and kind of don't treat them in a way that respects their choices and their autonomy, like that's what we get in return. That's really great.
Thanks, Romy. Any final thoughts? I don't see any other questions. Marla, thank you for catching that insurance question. Do you want to just cheer anyone on who's thinking, somebody's like, I'm too scared, it's scary? What's the thing you want them to hear your voice like Obi-Wan Kenobi over their shoulder? What would you tell them?
Take your time. Wait till you're ready. Like, fuck FOMO. Have JOMO, baby. Have the joy of missing out. We should have all cultivated that. Like, if you're not ready, you're not ready. Don't push yourself. You're going to give yourself an anxiety attack. Like, wait until it feels real.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I as somebody who didn't run an in-person live event, but attended almost everyone's events here, Romy and Marla, I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person. Marla, thank you for having a virtual side of things so that I could teach and hang out with people. I would say, if you can, attend other people's well-designed and implemented events so you can actually get a feel for what it looks like and feels like. And that might be a nice, way of kind of baby stepping into things. I like to treat these kinds of events, since a lot of us are sex educators, like anal sex. The slower you go, the faster you might get there. So increments, everyone. And any other advice? Now that I've ruined it.
I do have some advice really quick. Like, I went to Frolicon, and I was teaching and had a table there, and it was vaccinated folks only. So, but my class ended up having about like 30 to 40% of the total Frolicon population. And so I needed to move classrooms. So I was just thinking that if you're going to have the pod spacing, just to be aware and to have different size classrooms if you're going to be having it at a hotel or something similar to a hotel, just to make sure maybe having extra rooms if this is still happening, if this is still a thing. So yeah, because I feel like we always kind of have extra rooms at Sex Down South, but I think because of the pod spacing, that limits the amount of people that are in a space. So yeah, anyway.
And
That's it.
I would add that culture is everything when you run an event or create a community, and running an event is just like creating a sort of localized temporary community. And so making sure that folks are bought into that culture, that they understand what the expectations are very clearly, that that's repeated over time for folks, and that you're being like consistent and also kind, but consistent is just so important. And that clarity was the most important thing in developing Bonobo's approach to running events. And I really attribute so much of our success to that we have like such a great culture and so many folks who are bought into our vision and what we're up to, and just like how we're approaching safety. And yeah.
I'll add on to that, William, having been a part of watching you and Misha build that culture. It wasn't just the clarity. You were having conversations sometimes every week with the community, and the ask me anythings that you were doing with the health officials that you would bring in. So like people were actively talking about and sharing their feelings about things and growing in my watching it happen, like growing together as a community, and having those conversations. It wasn't just a bullet pointed list of here are our policies. People were arguing with you and pushing back on things, and actually living it out in real time. And I thought that was it was wonderful to watch, and I wonder if that wasn't also part of what really helped everybody feel on the same page at some point.
For sure. Yeah. I think that's all part of it. Being willing to be vulnerable and like have those hard conversations. Like going to the places where like we actually don't know the answer and we're like figuring it out together, and we're acknowledging that we just don't know everything. And so we're going to folks with expertise, and we're gonna like trust that expertise to a certain extent, and we're gonna like make sure that individual's expertise is also well supported by the scientific consensus, like that was our approach. And I would say that it served us well. But again, going back to the culture thing, like we didn't have a bunch of like crazy, and I don't want to use that word, like we didn't have a bunch of like fruitless debates about vaccine science and whether vaccines are safe and whether they're effective and so on and so forth in Bonobo's community platform spaces, because like we set like a really clear guideline in our community discussion guidelines about like following scientific consensus, not just on COVID, on everything, and just like having that consistency, which we've been like consistently enforcing around like all kinds of things before the pandemic hit, was just very helpful in getting a generally aligned group of people together, and also like making it pretty clear to folks who weren't aligned what there was and wasn't space for, where the boundaries were.
So I'd love to bring this in for a landing as we almost run out of time, but I just want to touch on something. Angel, you had mentioned before about whatever an event or community decides are going to be their requirements for vaccination or testing or whatnot. You had mentioned about like it was a question or a point of consent for Folsom Street. Do you want to just make that a couple of more sentences rather than just because I think that has a lot of power and usefulness in it.
Yeah, I think that because our events are rooted in the kink and leather and alt sex communities, consent is an ongoing conversation we're all having and should have forever. So we had some shared framework with community members around that. And the way that we framed COVID and vaccination status being a consent issue is that in a crowd like the crowds that we have, you are taking on the risk of being near people, and we as a community didn't want to consent to being near the people who were higher risk and not vaccinated, because not just because there was a lot of breakthrough cases in San Francisco because of Delta and all of that, but because it puts I'll speak for myself as a vaccinated person who is very firm that is for the protection of my community. It puts me in the position of possibly getting someone sick who does not have that protection. And because of that, I do not consent to being put in that risk category. I can manage my own risks, but when it comes to getting someone sick who is unprotected, that's a risk that I wasn't willing to take on, that our board, when we talked about our rules, wasn't willing to take on, and that our community at large doesn't feel comfortable with. So it's really not about, I think that people take it the exact opposite way, like they're being excluded, but I'm like, no, you're being protected. And the folks who are like, I'm immune compromised and I want to come to your party and I'm not vaccinated, I'm like, please don't. Like, I don't want you to come to my party and get sick. That would put me in a very intense moral quandary. So I actually, it's the case that, if you're somebody who isn't vaccinated, you are at higher risk. If you're somebody who is immune compromised and not vaccinated, you're at very high risk. And I don't feel comfortable putting myself in the position of possibly getting you sick. So because we weren't able to control distancing at our level of crowd, because when we have our smaller events, when we have our little art fairs, we don't check vaccines. We just rely on distancing and masking and being outdoors. So I think it's also a mixture of things. Like, I don't think every event is something that should require vaccines. I don't think that most outdoor events need it, because you're far enough away from other people. It has been proven that outdoor transmission is absolutely very, very low unless you are in a large crowd or people are doing a specific sort of activities like singing or shouting. So like sports things, or, getting beat on the streets. So since we are in that category, we wanted to consider ourselves a higher risk activity. But if you're doing something smaller, like we do, we have these little art fairs. We don't we don't require vaccines, or would we ask? Because you can rely on the other things to keep you safe. So it really should be like a overlapping set of measures that we take to keep each other safe.
Thank you, Angel. And this is why the people who are into using single tails that are longer than 6 feet might have an advantage for how they're playing. I know a couple of our panelists have a hard out on the half hour because they have other calls and things that they're doing. So why don't we'll land the plane right now. I'm going to invite, if for everyone who wants to say goodbye on the recording, I think this is fun. I'm going to undo the paneling. I'm going to remove the spotlights, and if anybody wants to say goodbye, you can all unmute yourself and say goodbye, but that means you're going to be recorded. If you just want your voice recorded, turn off your cameras, and let's see if I can do this in 3, 2, I'm removing all the spotlights. Hang on. Oh, it's almost there. There's got to be an easier way to do this. I don't know how to do it. Make it easier. And then Marla, you're the last one. How do I remove Marla? I don't know how.
Everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, panelists. You rock. Good night.
Good night.
My voice. Mwah.